Hi there, everybody, and welcome to today's AOP Live. I really appreciate you joining us to today's conversation. I want to start with a little bit of housekeeping before I go into introductions. If this is the first time you've attended an AOP Live webinar, it's really all about the conversation. There's no slides. That's something that's really important to us because we want this to be as engaging as it can possibly be. We actually, as you went through the registration process, you'll have noticed that we asked questions or asked you to submit questions so that we could integrate those questions into the conversation today. And we received over 20 questions, which we do have ready for me to pick through as we go through the conversation. But I do really want to encourage you to ask questions as we go along. On that note, I first just want to do a quick introduction to Kelly Barner. Kelly is joining me in helping to facilitate and moderate today's session. Kelly will be jumping off camera in a moment, but we'll be in the background here. Just if you submit any questions, you have any comments, anything like that, you can do that through the GoToWebinar panel. So Kelly, first of all, thank you for joining us and for keeping a look.
Thanks very much.
On everything.
These sessions are fun. I'm ready. Let's go.
All right, so yeah, pop any questions in there. Kelly's going to keep an eye on those, and then I'm going to jump over to Kelly as we go through the conversation to really be your voice as we go through the webinar. Now, today's topic, we're going to talk about tail spend. The title of the conversation is The Vanishing Tail, Getting a Grip on Long Tail Spend by Following the 3 C's. So we're going to explore what that is a little bit. And before we do that, I'm going to introduce the two guests that we have today. Now, I just want to say as well, from a format perspective, we're actually going to do things a little bit different than what we've done before because we're going to go into Tom as I introduce Tom's journey. And then we're going to come back and start doing a Q&A after we've walked through Tom's journey. So with that being said, I'll introduce you. Tom Cicale is the Vice President of Procurement at Merck, and Sameer Sharma is Client Engagement Leader in Denali's delivery organization. So the first question, while I have you both on camera, it's a question that I always ask everybody that is in a podcast, whether in a webinar. I'm going to ask this first to you, Tom, is did you find procurement or did procurement find you?
Well, I would say my career, I started in finance and I accompanied a lot of the subcontract buyers to different suppliers to audit their process. So really got close to procurement. And when a position opened in the metals field, they called and they said, would you be interested? And I said, yeah. And the rest is history. I mean, I love procurement. I've been in it for a long time now, and it's a great profession.
It's funny how we often end up in some, I say random category, but a category that oftentimes it's not our area of expertise, and that's what the gateway is into procurement, and you end up doing something completely different, but it's kind of the intro into the profession.
Right.
And Sameer, I'm going to ask you the same question. Did you find procurement or did procurement find you?
Procurement found me. I started my career in Pittsburgh here at a company called Free Markets. I think we were the pioneer for business-to-business auctions. And they were on campus hiring. I was finishing up my master's, and it seemed like a really great company, great idea. And from there, through different consulting roles within providers, and then working with other companies, stayed in the procurement and supply chain space. So yeah, it found me, and it's a good place. It's a win-win for, I guess, for both procurement and me.
So what I'm actually going to ask Sameer is if you don't mind popping off the camera while Tom and I chat for a few minutes, then we're going to come back to you when we have the Q&A. Thanks, Sameer. So Tom, we got the screens to ourselves here. And I want to talk a little bit about your journey at Merck regarding tail spend and managing tail spend. You know, the first, well, I'm going to ask I guess a question before we get started in terms of defining tail spend, because tail spend can mean different things to different people. And I just wonder how you at Merck, and as you've gone through your journey, have actually defined what tail spend actually means. You know, what comes under the umbrella of tail spend for you?
Yeah. Okay. So let me start by saying Merck is an interesting company because we really have three different businesses in our umbrella. One is a healthcare arm, one is a life science arm, and the third is a chemicals arm. And trying to bring the three, what we call sectors, together can sometimes be complicated because they tend to operate in their own independent silos. So we wanted to have one definition of tail spend that everyone could appreciate. And we looked at spending patterns and we said, you know, where is 80% of our activity? Well, it's actually with 20% of our suppliers. So this is what we identified as tail spend. And we started drilling into it more and identified the number of transactions and the cost per transaction and the activities and the FTEs that are involved in making all this happen. So then on top, we had our CFO constantly after us with supplier proliferation. You know, when you have end users adding stuff, they tend to choose their own suppliers. Mm-hmm. That adds to our supplier base, and then it gets out of control, and then we're questioned, what are you doing? Why is this so high? Why do we have, you know, 100,000 furniture suppliers, you know? So tail spend for us is under 50,000. Mm-hmm. We looked for patterns that were under the 50,000 that were single one-off versus repeat, because we would handle those differently. Mm-hmm. For opportunities in the tail spend to manage it, and that's how we got on this whole track.
Now you mentioned, it's an interesting point you said about the kind of challenge came from a CFO, and they obviously saw supplier proliferation. And I often see tail spend initiatives come from a CEO. Why do you think that is? Because it's not often, well, in fact, I won't preempt that, you know, whether it's a cost thing, whether it's a risk thing, because it's not often the reason why we as procurement people think that tail spend should be something that's addressed.
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult in the beginning because everyone started calling it low value spend, okay? And I said, no, we got to stop that, because low value automatically means it doesn't have any meaning for anyone and just ignore it. So by calling it tail spend, it got a little more attention, and we were able to get the traction that we wanted and build the momentum with people. So that was really important. But the CFO always had issues with, you know, the number of suppliers that are in the database. And, you know, when you bring consultants in, consultants look at this information and they don't always understand it at the level we do. And they're talking directly to him. So they're giving the wrong, mm-hmm. You know, for example, you know, we add suppliers, and in order to keep the history in some systems, you can't delete them. Okay. You can deactivate them, but you can't delete them. So the first retort that I had when he said, oh, we have all these suppliers, I said, yes, but they're not all active. He goes, what does that mean? And I said, well, we deactivate them so we can keep the history and always know what we bought, where we bought it, what we paid. Yet, you know, they're not someone that someone could just order something from without reactivating the suppliers. So if you really look at the database, you might think we have hundreds of thousands of suppliers across all our divisions. Then less than half are active.
Yeah. So as you looked at starting to address tail spend, where did you start?
So we started, it's interesting because we wanted to work with Denali. We had finally selected them as the provider, and that was a lot of work trying to figure out who the right partner is. When we started looking at the data, we were trying to really boil the ocean, meaning looking in all categories, you know, and we said, show us all spend under 50,000 in all categories, you know, and we started going into discussions with the category leaders who automatically get defensive because they feel like if he's finding stuff that I'm not managing, he's going to think I'm not doing my job, you know? So there's always that, don't worry, I'll take care of it, you know? And we said, no, this is normal. You know, procurement is a function that's paid by the business, and they pay for us to manage from a certain level. I mean, we can't manage every nickel and dime. There's just not enough of us. We're too lean. So we tend to manage the more strategic stuff, and we were allowing the business to manage the lower value stuff, you know? So that's how this all came about. And, you know, I decided that it was best if I kept the tail spend while we were doing a pilot within my family of categories that I have responsibility for. And then we could show successes, and they would start to, get some momentum, and people would start pulling, instead of us trying to push it. And that's exactly what happened. So it's an interesting.
So when you went into it, so you brought you went through a search to find a provider, or to find a partner to kind of run the process of managing your till spend. Is that right? Is that what you were looking for from the outside?
Yeah. Yeah. But the difficult part for us is we didn't just want someone to manage it. We wanted someone to partner with us, because our systems, we don't have one ERP system. We don't have two. We have 25. Okay. And managing those ERP systems and, having someone act as your partner means we gave them laptop computers. We gave them access to our systems so that they could run reports and analyze data. And, we do it together with, our team does it with Denali so that we focus our scope where we think we can get the biggest, value. And then we work our way down. So we don't do it all at once. We do it in pieces. And how we started this was with a small pilot in our life science division. There were 8 entities that were all on the same ERP system, because I didn't want this to be about ERP systems being the barrier, right? So we did just with the one, and this was SAP. And with the 8 sites, we evaluated spend under 50,000, and we kind of divided it into buckets. We said, these are the one-offs, and these are the ones that we have repetitive over and over and over again buys. And the ones that were repetitive, we wanted to look at on what we call a proactive basis. So opportunity here where we can negotiate discounts based on how much of it we're buying, instead of every time it being a single purchase, So we were putting frame orders or blanket orders in place for those. And then the spot buys are the ones we really had to get into the business and have them work with us. So we needed buy-in up front. And, I'm sure you're going to ask me about how we got the buy-in, but I'll talk about that later. But once we got things going, the momentum just built. And, we were negotiating not only prices of items, but we were negotiating rates, contractor rates for things. So, I might have been paying $100 an hour. Now I'm paying $72 an hour or something like that. And the benefits come in many different forms, which brings challenges to controlling, because they want to validate all this, and it's not that they're going to take, procurement's word for it and just say, oh yeah, it just saved me X dollars an hour,
Where did you get your insights from to be able to do some of that negotiation? Or was it more of a leverage play that you were actually looking at it for the first time?
Yes. So it's interesting. We are headquartered in Darmstadt, Germany. And about 7 years ago, we have a governance and performance division within procurement. They started what they called a low value spend effort, okay, in Germany. And it failed miserably. I mean, really bad, because the communication plan didn't exist. No one knew what they were trying to accomplish. So they didn't have the buy-in. They were shutting lines down. So when the CPO asked me to do this, the first thing I said to him is, I'm not doing it in Germany. I'm going to start it in the US. We'll do a pilot. And if you like what you see, then we'll, roll it out broader. So that was how it all started. And now Germany hears and sees the results, and they're asking questions now, and they're actually, some of the category guys are calling saying, hey, can you do this in my category? And before, in the beginning, I was arguing with them, this isn't a bad thing that you don't have control over something $5,000, you know what I mean? But it adds up, believe me, when you start looking at it, you see, I'm talking, millions that this little pilot that we started was like 1.5 million that we saved in just a few months, and we were just like scratching the surface. We didn't really get where we expect.
So from I do want to talk about buy-in. I'm going to ask about buy-in from a procurement perspective first, and then go broader to the business. You know, you said that you had some pushback, and there was, I don't know if pushback's the right word, but fear in the buyers that this is going to uncover something that, you know, I should have been doing. It should have been my job to do, and it's going to put me in a bad light. And I definitely see that all the time when, as a service provider, you go in and you have those kind of challenges to overcome. And I'd just be interested in the confines of the pilot that you did, how was it a case of giving the team confidence that that wasn't the fact, or was it, we're going to do it and the results are going to speak for themselves?
It was a little of both. I mean, we started off, we have a procurement board. Okay, so I have 7 other colleagues that are responsible in procurement with me, and then we have the CPO. And I explained what the process was, and everybody said, oh, we did that 7 years ago, it didn't work. I'm like, no, this is going to be a whole different thing, and we're going to run it differently, we're going to communicate it differently, we're going to bring the businesses in when the time's right, you know. And I said, I'm going to start in my own categories because I want to be able to prove the, you know, the results first. And then when you see what happens, you decide if you want to join in. So we created an advisory board that consisted of select members of the procurement board. And we would have Denali come in on a quarterly basis and report out how things were going. And the ones that had the most questions in the beginning were the quietest in the end. You know, it's the thing. So I think they saw the benefit and the value, and things started to quiet. But that's procurement. That was the easy one. That's where I'm from. You know, it's getting site heads, you know, business unit heads and stakeholders in the business. And you know, like I said, we had 3 different sectors, you know, that we had to go to and convince. So until we proved it in life science and had kind of a proof of concept that we could then bring to the other business sectors, we had to let the pilot play out. And then it was a matter of bringing in the controllers, because we had to, how are we going to do this? I mean, how are we going to have a third party managing this? And what we've done is we've arranged with Denali that they get paid only if they save money, okay? And they get a percentage of what they save. And I sold this to the business as, this is unfound money. This is money that we weren't paying attention to. And, you know, we're getting a good percentage of it, and we're going to give these guys a percentage. And, you know, we want this program to get global, but it can't get global until we can prove it local. So that's kind of how we started. And, you know, we spent a lot of time getting buy-in on the front end. Not a lot of time, but we wanted to create the right communication plan. Kind of looked at each group, and we said, we have to start with the division heads, and we have to explain to the division heads what the process is, what it will look like, and what we need from them. And basically what we needed from them was confidence that, you know, they were behind it and that their site heads should support it. Then the next group was going to the site heads and talking to them and explaining the same thing and saying, we really need your support because your end users, stakeholders, are doing things that they spend more time being, you know, better in the lab or better in marketing or better in other parts of the business instead of spending their time searching on the internet for where can I buy my pipettes. So, you know, just didn't make sense, you know? So I said, there's a value for you there with getting your FTEs more focused on what their job is. And 2, we're getting a better process that makes it easier for them to order. So it's not so cumbersome for them to get what they need and get it quick and at a better price. You know, so that's how we sold it to them. But we did round tables with the bigger sites where we actually went out there, Denali went with us, and we explained the process to the stakeholders so they knew exactly how it was going to work. And we started off explaining the difference between the proactive and then, of course, the spot buy. And, we said, we're going to start with proactive, so it's not really going to involve you too much. But we're going to come back in a few months and we're going to be looking to do spot buy. And here's how the spot buy will work. And in our company, we moved all of our accounts payable to a shared service center.
Mm-hmm.
So that shared service center is getting all the requisitions to generate a requisition into a PO. Okay, so all that transactional stuff is there. And when the invoice comes in, they're there to pay it.
Yeah.
So we needed to bring them in and explain to them what's in it for them, and it was huge. And they were like right on our bandwagon because it's going to save a ton of work on the tail end for them. So it was a good introduction for everybody into the process. And now we were at a point where, okay, now we need to do this,
Would you, from an end stakeholder perspective, did you get the pushback of why are you trying to change my supplier? Or did you get, this is great because I really don't want to be doing this and I spend too much time doing it?
We get a mix. And even when we get into the population of stakeholders, we had a mix, because you'll have some that say, oh, this is great, I don't want to do this, I don't have time. And then you have others that say, I know where to get my stuff, I don't need your help.
Yeah.
So we had a very wide mix. And what we wanted to do was help them understand the tools that are available for them, because we have electronic catalogs, we have procurement cards, okay? But I think what's important is here, for them to put a new supplier in, they have to generate a supplier request. It has to go through an approval cycle. You have to get 9 from the supplier. It's a lot of work. And then when it finally gets approved, you have to generate a requisition, which takes time, and then that requisition becomes a PO, and then the PO gets delivered and it's a receipt, and it's just blah, 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 one thing after another. And all those things cost money, So we tried to impress upon them, if we can make the process more efficient, getting you what you need, we'll listen to who you want to use, okay, because that's important to us. But if we find someone that's more cost competitive, we'll show you, because we'll be very transparent. That's not an issue, but you need to respect that, and there were a few that didn't, and we had to make, phone calls to their manager, and, reluctance in some cases happened,
At least you had that top level accountability, like the top level support behind you.
Right. And, we put in metrics, certain metrics, which I'm sure you'll talk to me about that. But, we wanted to make sure what's in it for them. That's what everybody wants to hear. No one wants to change unless there's something in it for them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't prove a benefit, why are you doing this? Just let us do what we do,
And so when you went big, you had a successful pilot. Did you then decide to roll it out across the company wide, or did you still take a phased approach to rollout?
We did a phased approach. And, I don't want to make this sound like it's taking forever, because it's really not. I mean, we've been engaged with Denali for about 1.5 years. And we're now rolled out in the US to all sites.
Mm-hmm.
Talking like 35 sites that they work with. And that rollout plan happened, as I said, we have sectors. So the first part of the plan was continue rolling out to life science. So we communicated back to the business unit, division head of life science, and said, here's what we're going to do based on the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, oh, this is great. You saved us, $1.5 million already. So can I put you down for 10 million next year? A joke. But he said, yeah, absolutely. You have our full support. So then we went to the business units, did the same thing. And we said, we're going to bring the other guys in. Okay. And then we went to the controllers and then the stakeholders. So, with the controllers, it was easy because, they're controllers in their individual sites, and the head of controlling for life science knew what we were doing. So was able to talk their language with me, even though I told the story, he was able to talk their language, so they understood exactly how we were going to provide, the savings, how it could be checked and verified, how the invoices were going to come in, how they would be paid eventually and spread, what the savings would look like coming in, you know. So it was all important for them to understand that. So in the US, we rolled out with life science, and then about maybe 6 weeks later, we rolled out with healthcare, and then shortly behind that with the chemical division.
Yeah.
All divisions are up and running. All controllers are aware. All stakeholders know. Anyone that created a requisition, we kind of looked for those that created a certain amount of requisitions, and from that level up, those are the pulled in. And we kind of called them the power users, and they were helping the others along with what we're doing and why.
Interesting. So they became part of they had some ownership over the success of the project as well.
Right, right.
So the last question, and then I'll bring Sameer back in for some more Q&A. You kind of teased metrics there. What does success look like?
Yeah, so the first thing was we wanted to make sure that it was delivering the financial value that was expected out of it, because everybody expects, that from procurement. That's a given. But we also wanted to have service level metrics. So, as you can imagine, the first concern everyone had is, now you're going to introduce a third party into my recs. When I want it now, and this third party is going to take it, and it's going to take them days to get back to me, if they get back to me. Oh, no, this is a whole different thing. It's a process that we go through. So we had a certain metric for turnaround time for requisition. Okay, it was 48 hours. So, and what we did too is, if we saw that Denali wasn't going to add any value to it, meaning it was already under contract, or we, had some other mechanism for buying this, Denali would just pass it through to shared service, and they would place the order. Okay.
Yeah. They wouldn't sit on it and kind of figure out if they could add any value or anything like that. It just kind of went past straight through.
Then we did end user satisfaction scores. So we sent out surveys, and we did this after 3 months, and we did it again after 6 months. And we, not only are these, check the box questions or radio buttons, they allowed for comments, and we had comments that were pretty nasty and some that were really good, and we went back out to the roundtables and we acknowledged both. And we said, look, we heard this, and why do you think that? We want to understand. We didn't say who said it, but, we wanted to make sure they understood we're listening, So those user satisfaction scores improved dramatically just in that 3 month, period, the first 3 months. Then we had a supplier reduction and consolidation effort where, we want to be able to show that not only are we saving money and doing things more efficiently and taking it out of the hands of the stakeholder so they can do something better, but we want to make sure that the supplier proliferation stops and we get more control and actually shrink to more preferred providers and start directing people to where to go and get things. And it just made it easier. My next challenge, and Sameer knows this, we're pushing them for automation. We're looking for chatbot functionality, robotics. There are easier ways to do some of these transactions, and we want to get to them quick.
Well, I want to, Sameer, if you want to just join us on the video. While I'm doing that, I think there's a couple of questions that came in for points of clarification that Kelly may be able to jump in and ask you, Tom. Do you have anything, Kelly?
I do, as a matter of fact. A couple of them are very specific, and then one's a little bit broader. So just to clarify your definition on tail spend, you had said $50,000. Was that per supplier or per transaction?
Per transaction.
Okay.
So, you have to understand, based on the size of your company, you're going to find your tail spend. So you have to do kind of an analysis that shows where's my 80-20, and our 80-20 was at that 50,000 mark. Now, I'm not saying we never reached above 50,000, because in some occasions we did. We went up to 100, you know, but they were spot circumstances, and WNS would have to ask us. They wouldn't just do it, you know.
Okay, perfect. And I actually think you answered the second clarification question there. Maggie was interested in, when you looked at the transactions that satisfied your criteria, did the Pareto principle play out? Did it end up being roughly that 20% was the tail? Did it in fact work out that way?
It really did. It really did. And, you know, we showed it to our CFO. I actually had a graph that showed exactly the tail spend. And I said, you know, we have a tail spend, and then we have kind of a, you know, a mid-tail spend. So we're going to start with the tail, you know, and then we're going to move into this mid, you know, and we kind of showed the number of transactions from 0 to 50,000, and then from 50,000 to 100,000, and then 100 and up. Okay. And guess where most of the transactions were? Below the 50,000. So, you know, he understood immediately why we were going after that target.
Okay, perfect. And then one last question I have for you, although I do also, Phil and Tom, Derek says cheers. So positive energy for you both from Derek. I also have a question for you about your results. We're interested in how the savings that you managed to achieve in the tail, the savings percentage, roughly compared to the average savings level you would typically see in a non-tail sourcing project.
Okay, so we average roughly 4% savings. Sometimes it's 10 or higher, sometimes 2, you know, but on average it's around 4, maybe 5, in that range. And, you know, we've had strategic projects that we work on that we're happy to save 4 to 5%. So, you know, on a tail spend, spot buy, those kinds of things, you're doing good if you save in that kind of percentage. I mean, Sameer, tell me if I'm wrong.
No, that's absolutely right, Tom. You know, that number also goes up with time, but you're absolutely right. Between 4 to 5% on an aggregate basis is what we've been seeing so far.
Excellent. Thank you. Phil, I'll pass back to you to continue with the flow.
All right. Thanks a lot, Kelly. So if you do have questions, I do see that there's some more coming in. We are going to jump back in with some questions in a couple of moments. But I did just want to bring and talk a little bit more generally about tail spend with a question for Sameer. So, you know, we're looking at the impact. We talked a little bit there about the impact of tail spend management. And right now, actually, I know that WNS Denali is running a benchmarking study that is looking at priorities and plans in 2021 in terms of tail spend. I just wonder if you could share some insights in what you're seeing kind of out in the field in how procurement is thinking about tail entering into 2021.
No, good question, Phil. Thank you. And the survey is still in place. It hasn't closed yet, so somebody from my team might drop a link in the chat messages for other people if they want to participate and get access to the results. But, you know, we've asked CPOs and procurement leaders to talk about different aspects. And from a tail program, you know, the different things around, you have successfully completed one on one end of the spectrum to all the way to the other where they haven't even attempted one. And I think when I looked at these numbers earlier today, I have a note here, about 70 we've got responses. And so far, not one has indicated that they have a fully implemented and a steady state tail spend program. Kind of like what we're also doing here, but I think we're very close to where we want to be. The size of Tom's organization is massive. It's a global company across divisions, geographies, continents, languages. So and ERPs, which I know, Tom, you love, the 25 ERPs. So we're getting there, but I think the key thing there was that nobody seemed to respond with having an existing fully implemented program. So that's a very interesting outcome that I'm seeing so far.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that you know, opportunities like this still definitely exist within procurement. I think tail spend is one of those things that we often look as maybe it's a hard animal to get our hands around, and so we don't necessarily focus there. You know, Tom, from your perspective, is that kind of what you felt in the time where you didn't address the tail?
You know, it's interesting for me because most of my career in procurement was direct. But as manager, of course, you have direct and indirect, but there was always an emphasis on the direct side. You know, where we see the money flowing through the P&L, and, you know, we see it on the bottom line. We see top line growth there. You know, indirect, it's really hard to track. We never know if you really got the savings because it doesn't really show. So when I went over to the indirect side, that was my biggest thing. I wanted to prove that there is value there and we're going to show you, you know, and that's what this does, you know, we can actually show it. And, you know, the controllers struggle a little bit with, okay, so how do we determine how to pay WNS and then split that cost across all our sites, you know? That's entirely up to you how you do it. But what we do is we put a high-level cost center, and then we provide the backup every quarter for what they're going to be paid, okay? And that detail is by site. So if they want to take it, it's even by item. So if they go into the very nitty-gritty, they can. But my advice to them was, hey, look, the amount of savings that each site got for the quarter, determine that percentage of the bill and push it to that site, you know, and that's how we've done it. And it's worked really well in the US. And then we get to Europe, and now it's a whole nother challenge because that's the mothership, and it's, oh, we can't do the, you know, had to kind of show them what we were doing. They're like, oh, yeah, we could do that, you know. I had the controller from the US on the phone with me, taking them through exactly what we do and how we validate, you know.
Now, there's something that you, I think you said, so I want to just confirm that I heard this right, that you really took, that finance was involved in validating the savings as you are going through that savings process. And I wanted to just bring that out because that's so critical, you know, because we often get the pushback from finance, and it's an age-old problem, of course, for procurement of, I don't believe your numbers. And if finance is actually involved in the process of validating those numbers, it means that those numbers are, I hate to say it like this, but finance see them as being real numbers as opposed to something that perhaps we've extrapolated or, you know, applied some kooky calculation to or something like that.
And that's why we did it, because, you know, the credibility is most important for the success of the program. You know, if they think you're just going through the motions and it's not bringing any real value, you're not going to get a lot of traction, and you're not going to get a lot of attention from anybody. People are feeling the impact, not only on the savings, but on the efficiencies and on what's in it for them. You know, I think everyone's realizing that, and it's really taking off.
Now I'm going to, Kelly, I think we're getting a lot of questions in, so I'm going to come over to you in a second. A lot of the questions that we have in advance we're actually covering as we're going through the conversation, which is great. I have a question from Magdalena, and Magdalena asks about what are some of the key steps in managing and potentially eliminating rogue spend? So are you looking at rogue spend as a part of the tail, or as the spend that you're just finding about afterwards that circumvented the entire process?
Yeah, so as procurement, we manage what we call maverick spend, rogue spend, by sector, okay? So we know exactly which sectors are better than others with putting POs in advance of an invoice, you know. In the beginning, we had a lot of people that were getting an invoice and then creating the PO to pay it. You know, because we kind of set a policy back 5 years ago, no PO, no pay. You know, and of course we paid, but we made it very painful for the supplier, because we called the supplier and said, hey, don't do this anymore because, you know, we're just going to hold your payment up.
Yeah, you're exposing yourself by doing that.
Yep, exactly. And so please don't take any orders from anyone without a PO. And so, you know, we are tracking our Maverick, which is very low. I mean, our average Maverick spend is 2.1%. And that's pretty cool for a company of our size.
Yeah.
And we track it every single month. So as a procurement board, our governance group gives us a report card by the sectors that we own, okay? So I own plant services globally, so I get my report card. And it tells me, you know, here's your price savings, here's your cost avoidance, here's your Maverick spend, here's your DPO, here's your APP.
Mm-hmm.
We know exactly how we're doing in all these areas, you know.
And so for the purpose of that metric, you're calculating that based on those that provided the services without having a PO.
Yeah, that's how we count it. And, you know, the P card has helped, but imagine P card in the US is much more widely accepted than it is in Europe, and Asia even further behind. So, you know, we're trying to find these alternatives for avoiding that one-time PO where you got to set a supplier up new, create a requisition, create that invoice, create that receipt, create that payment, you know, one time, and then you never use them again. And now supplier list growing, you know. So Maverick is very important to us, and not only from did they create a PO after the fact, but from are they all going to their own independent individual suppliers, or are they really following the guidelines and where we're trying to direct them and funnel them?
Kelly, sorry, Sameer, I don't know if you were going to add something.
No, we're just going to add, I think, tying it back to Tom's earlier point around the shared services center, right? Because we also have a closed loop with them where if they're getting any requests for purchase order, which should have been routed through the spot buy desk or the sourcing program, they look for that and they check for that. If it has been bypassed, then they close that loop back with the requester. They bring us in the loop. And then we pick that up. So, you know, we've got a closed loop there as well, where we're preventing any leakages on a PR to PO basis.
Kelly, I want to come over to you for some of the questions that we've been getting in as we've been having this conversation.
Yes, there's both a ton of questions that have come in and questions that suggest to me that our audience today has some level of experience with tail spend management, sort of enough to know what the little nuanced stumbling blocks are in this whole process. Yeah. One of the interesting questions here, Tom, this comes from Pallav. He's wondering if that $50,000 benchmark played out equally well globally, or whether it varied by region, either because of the way the different regions were spending money or because of differences in currency valuation. Did you find that you had to adjust that globally?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are in our two biggest regions right now. We're in the US globally, which in the US, most of our sites, the 50,000 threshold works, okay? If you start getting to other parts of North America, like tier 2 Latin America, 50, you would pretty much be, you know, letting a lot slide by, you know? So when we get to those kinds of countries, we have to look at our threshold again and reevaluate because, you know, the business is much smaller, the site, and we want to make sure we're making the right impact. So we will probably lower those to more in the 10,000 range, I would say. But Europe, we have the same thing. We have a tier 2 Europe, and you know, when we get into those countries, we will do the same thing. I did mention that we've actually started initiatives in Europe. So we're all in the US, and we're actually in parts of Europe already. So we started with French-speaking Switzerland, doing France. We're doing some of Germany, not all yet. So that's starting to develop, and I fully expect in 2021 will be all across Europe. And then we're going to start looking more into the tier 2s as was questioned. Yep.
Okay. What are the factors that are going into both how you segment the different parts of the world for inclusion in the tail spend program and how you prioritize bringing them online?
Yeah, so we kind of look by site. As I mentioned, we've given Denali full access to our system so that they can go in and run reports. They've signed a non-disclosure agreement, so, you know, but they're able to go in with our help sometimes and evaluate the site data and see for that, you know, here are the sites we're planning to roll out next. And based on these sites, we're looking at spend below 50. And if we start to see the tail moving then we have to have a different conversation. We haven't seen that yet. What we have seen is the number of requisitions coming out of some of those sites is much smaller. So we've actually tabled those sites to a later phase. So we, and they're in now. We've got them all in.
Okay.
But started with the ones with the higher transactions first, and then worked our way down.
Okay. Sameer, was there anything that you wanted to add to that from Denali's perspective?
No. It's one of those approaches where, data uncovers in ideas, but it's that country level knowledge, the nuances for the sites, for the divisions that Tom and his team bring, which help prioritize. The other thing which you throw in there is any corporate initiatives or goals that a country might have or a division might have, where it might escalate things to earlier in the process. But otherwise, Tom described it perfectly.
Excellent. I have an additional question here from Robert. Tom, he would like to know how much of your tail spend was repetitive purchases versus spot buys?
So that I'm going to let Sameer answer because he's closer to it.
It's a good question, and it varies from category to category. But what we're seeing is, somewhere between 65 to 70% is repeat spend. That's how we're addressing it as repeat spend, trying to put in frame agreements so that it makes it easy for the requisitioner and the end users to continue to buy that without having spot buy or someone from procurement reach out to them. It sails right through. On the project spend, on the one-off spends, we certainly get involved a little bit more through spot buy program, but I would say 65 to 70% is repeat spend in the category that we're looking at. Yeah.
Okay. And where you mentioned category, this audience question can actually be sort of a follow-up to that. How did you find that your tail spend management strategy actually tied up on an individual category level? So were there some categories you were already managing where there was either more concentration of tail spend or less? Did you find that it worked with the overall category strategies that were being put in place, or was additional or a different type of work required even within category?
Yeah, so we focused, as I said in the beginning, in the plant services area because it was mine. So categories like MRO, CapEx, OpEx, site services, utilities, facilities, all those areas we started looking at first. And those are the things where, you're relying on people to sometimes do their own thing at below 50,000 because you simply don't have the staff to cover it all. So what we're doing is we're starting to look within the categories to understand how much spend under 50,000 do they have, okay, and what kind of spend is it? So you can imagine categories like IT, packaging, those are the next ones we're going to go after. Would I go after a direct material? I mean, that would be ridiculous because they don't have people buying whatever they want. There's, dedicated items that they buy, and, that's easy. Supply chain does all that. It's the stuff that you don't have an item number on maybe, or, you don't have a history in the system that says, I bought this from company X last time, and here's what I paid. It might be the first time you buy that thing. So, this is where we're trying to get more creative for people so that they don't have to start scouring the internet to figure out where to buy stuff.
Okay. And one last audience question, and then Phil, I'll give the floor back to you. I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to do my very best with this name. Shanti Bhushan, hopefully I'm close. Either Tom or Sameer, you guys know which one of you is best suited to answer this question. But what general statements would you make about the vendor consolidation that you saw, either in terms of the number of vendors that were consolidated or in terms of how the spend per vendor ended up being affected as a result of the consolidation?
I'll start, and Sameer, you can fill in.
Sure.
We have some very strategic supplier partners that we've developed, right, in the strategic part of our procurement. And it's best for us to try to direct as much of the procurement there as we can. So, you know, the Thermo Fishers of the world, you know, VWR, those kinds of guys, Motion Industries. I mean, it's important for us to try to avoid these little mom and pops popping up everywhere. So, you know, we're spending a lot of time on the front end evaluating what types of suppliers are being added and where are they, which categories, you know, and that's going to help us control and contain, because that's where we're going first. You know what I mean? If we start to see a lot of new suppliers that are developing in the packaging area, we're going there. You know, if we see more coming up in the utilities area, we're going to go there. You know, wherever we see the data, it's kind of where, you know. So Sameer, I don't know.
No, that's right, Tom. And I think what we've also been attempting to do quite successfully is, as we're looking at the requisitions, we are seeing who the suppliers are that are being used more often than not. That then funnels into our proactive side of the house, where we look at the different suppliers who are being used at the same site, across sites, across clusters, geographical clusters, and develop those projects which then lead to supply consolidation, right? So we're trying to funnel it that way as well, where we're leading ideas from not just from new vendor requests, but even existing transactions with existing vendors. How are they being spread out across multiple vendors for similar sites, similar categories, huge price differential? So a lot of different factors are considered when we do that.
Thank you both.
All right, thanks, Kelly, and thank you for all your questions that have come in. We've got so many questions that apologies if we haven't been able to get to any that you asked so far. I do actually have I have 3 last questions. I have one on the conversation and a couple to wrap up as we come towards the last 7 minutes or so here. The question that I have, just based on the kind of continuing on the conversation, is, and I think Sameer, I'll ask you first from your perspective. You know, you now have access to a lot of data. You get to see, you know, where spend is going, how it's being bought. You know, as you look at that, do you then start to make recommendations to say, you know what, I think this bucket of spend is better suited to going on a P card, or this bucket of spend you could run through a GPO, or, you know, this you can start to look at catalogs. So you're starting to look at alternative buying channels as well, as you're starting to get more granularity into the data of what's being spent.
Absolutely. And I think Tom mentioned a couple of those suppliers, right, where they have catalogs, they have corporate level programs. You know, for MRO suppliers, for example, where you're buying it through a distributor or a third distributor or someone local, a corner shop. And as you see that, the other thing that Tom talked about is, you know, we're working very closely as their sourcing organization with their category teams. So we meet at least twice a month with the category teams for the categories. So that's where all those ideas and funnel up. And I will say, for example, you seem to be buying a lot of these safety gloves or these safety shoes from a local company, and we know that you know, one of your catalog vendors has that same product, and sometimes even cheaper. So then we work with the category leads to go out to those sites, explain to them that there's a better way to buy it, better way, both price and efficiency. It's much easier from a catalog than it is to go through the PR process. So it's absolutely been something that we've been working on in terms of using that data to guide that spend to the preferred channel which exists.
Now, Tom, I want to come back to you with kind of the reflective lessons learned question. You know, as you look back on the process that you've gone through so far, is there anything that you wish that you'd done differently, or something that, you know, you wish you would have done that you didn't do through the process, that you perhaps are then applying to further rollouts down the line?
Yeah, what was easier for me is I was around when the governance group tried to do this 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And I heard all the backlash and the repercussions of it. Thank God wasn't involved, but I heard it. And there was a lot of learning there. So I almost knew what not to do. And then I knew that communication was the biggest thing to get the buy-in. So if we didn't put together a comprehensive communication plan, get it. So we put the plan together with the metrics and the whole story and, the pilot. I would not change anything that we did. The only thing that I kind of regret is going after all the categories in the beginning.
Yeah.
But it was more on an evaluation basis. It wasn't really like we were going after them. You know what I mean? We would just say, hey, you got X amount here. Can we talk about, oh, no, I got it covered, So we backed off and then kind of went a different direction with that. Other than that, I think everything has gone as planned, really fortunate.
And Sameer, I want to build on that for a last question for you. And that's, you've obviously seen the journey that Merck and that Tom has been going through. You see the journey that others are going through or that others would like to go through. Is there anything that you wish you could bottle up from what Tom and the team at Merck have done and share with other companies, as they're looking to really go on this journey for themselves?
It's a great question. Yeah, I think Tom hit upon them, and I think we can summarize it very well here is start in a controlled fashion, right? Because I think to your earlier point at the beginning, sometimes people don't get into this space because it's so vast, it's so dirty and so nasty that it's not worth it, right? And you get analysis paralysis. Where do you start? So start somewhere, control it, learn from it, have a closed loop, right? Because there will be hiccups, there will be challenges. So stay committed to the course, learn through those challenges, and don't let those challenges deviate from the focus of the program. And then I think finally, as Tom mentioned, with change, right? Continuous change management and communication. It's just not a one-time checkbox that you do and then you go forward. We've done roundtables, we've done surveys, we continue to go back to the sites. We continue to talk to the power users on a very frequent basis. Now that they understand what the benefit is for them, it's a very different program that it looks like now than it did in the first couple of months. So I don't know if you can bottle all of that together, but I'm sure if you use a big
maybe
enough,
a few bottles.
Yes.
Well, I want to wrap up. I want to thank you, Sameer. I want to thank you, Tom, for being so open and sharing your journey, because it's things like that that are so insightful, I think, for all of us as procurement professionals, as we're all learning of how we can apply some of these strategies and tactics to our own organization. And it's only through hearing, real stories and lessons learned that just gives us a lot more confidence, I think, to go and do things that from the outside might feel like they're a little bit unwieldy and a little challenging. And this is definitely one of those areas where it's becoming more and more important for procurement, but it's also where the heck do we even start? So it can be overwhelming. I want to thank you, Kelly, as well for jumping in with questions that we had from the audience, and thank you for everybody that submitted them. We had a lot that I didn't get to today. I think we covered most of them through the story, but I just want to appreciate everybody's time, and I hope that you'll have a happy holiday. So until next time, thank you, and thanks everybody.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
Take care.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.